Hi, everyone. Over the last few months, I've been speaking with a number of people who are involved in the rescue and care of animals and particularly wildlife in various types of situations. And over the next few months, I'll be continuing that series. And today, the seventh of our series, I'm chatting with Helen and Manfred from Five Freedoms Animal Rescue. Helen and Manfred play such a critical role in wildlife rescue and care in Victoria, both dedicating their lives to ensuring that they provide around-the-clock assistance to wildlife in need. Helen and Manfred, welcome, and thanks so much for chatting with me today. And how are you and Five Freedoms Animal Rescue going throughout this challenging time? And I'd like to give you the opportunity also to introduce the other people in this interview that we didn't know were going to be here.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, we've got a few reinforcements here. So I've got the lovely Candy with me, and so she's decided to get a cuddle while we're sitting down for a change. And who have you got, Helen?
I'm nursing Jolene, who was a fence hanger, foot and hip injury, and she's ticking along slowly.
Oh, fantastic. So, yeah, just to repeat that question then, how are you guys surviving in what, I mean, COVID has been a dramatic handbrake on so many activities, you know, right across the community, doesn't matter what area you work in, and how's it affected you guys?
I've got to say, we decided to be really responsible, and we're very conscious of how serious the pandemic was, and so, yeah, we were courageous and made the decision that we will do the right thing, and we went into isolation. And so we cancelled all the volunteers that we rely so heavily upon, and kind of thought that, you know, the animal situation might ease off a bit as well. Unfortunately, I didn't read the government publications about stay at home and keep away from, keep your distance from others and all the rest of it. So no sooner had we got rid of all of our volunteers and decided to do everything ourselves, we were just absolutely inundated in wildlife, and found ourselves busier than we had ever been, which presented a twofold problem for us, because we were now overworked with looking after the numbers of animals that we had, but it also meant that it had a massive impact on our ability to try to earn any money to survive. In particular,
yeah. I was going to say, it didn't put a handbrake on the rate of animals being injured, because we still had tradies driving and skittling animals with their bull bars. We were getting lots of kangaroos hit by cars, but then there was no detritus from a damaged car. So these were utes with bull bars and things ploughing through animals. We also had people walking around on their properties more. So they were finding injured animals that they weren't previously finding, because in isolation they were bushwalking more. And they also walked the dogs, which then chased kangaroo fences, down mine shafts, etc. So the rate of wounding and the number of animals didn't decrease, it actually increased.
Do you think when these people have been walking around their properties and finding these animals, do you think that's given them some sort of greater awareness of wildlife and the problems that they face?
Yeah. The type of people that call in injured animals are generally pretty nice people, and I think it opened their eyes up to the plight, and it opened their eyes up to getting involved, and that there are rescuers out there a lot of people don't realise that wildlife rescue it's not funded by government, although you did a magnificent job of getting funding for Wildlife Victoria for the hotline. But otherwise, the government doesn't fund it. So all wildlife rescue and rehabilitation is done by self-funded volunteers. So we met nice people who were unaware of what was happening to animals through them bringing animals to us.
Yeah. And now that restrictions are being partially lifted, and you know, that's been quite a segmented activity along the way, and I believe we're not too far away from another announcement on Tuesday, I think, or at least on Monday night, that there'll be restrictions will be lifted. Are you seeing a return to somewhat of normality with, I suppose, volunteers are concerned?
We had to get them back. We were dying without them. Well, Manfred was dying. I actually found having Manfred covering the outside area was really beneficial. I could do the inside stuff, and he was doing the outside stuff, but of course he wasn't earning. So we got volunteers back outside. And then so I found myself doing outside stuff and inside stuff. So my COVID break was over, whereas for Manfred, the volunteers returning was absolutely vital for us to survive and for him to survive.
Especially because some of them bring dogs with them.
Understandable completely. And look, I just, so a little bit of history lesson for all of us here. Most of our listeners probably won't know where the name Five Freedoms comes from. Can you share what that name means to our listeners?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure where I first came across it, but it was something that I discovered, and when I looked into it, it was actually developed in Britain, and it was a set of standards for animal welfare that were created for livestock. So it was something that was developed, I think it was actually the Britain Farm Animal Welfare Council, and they developed these standards in 1965. And when I read them, they struck a chord with me, because it was all about freedom from pain and injury and disease, freedom from fear and distress, freedom from hunger and thirst, and freedom to behave normally. Everything that our animals are also, deserve and need. And a big part of rescue work, unfortunately, is not just about having, beautiful joeys on our laps. It's about going out and seeing horribly injured animals that are, they've got, serious injuries and they're not going to make it. And so we need to euthanize those animals. And it made me realise how important the aspect of freedom from pain and suffering is. And so I quickly realised that these standards, the concept of these 5 standards, were how we basically live our life every single day, like right at our shelter as well, the way we try to make animals as comfortable as possible, and also that we provide them with a real rehabilitation program that makes them fit for release one day, because this is all about getting them back into the wild. And those 5 standards, the 5 freedoms, are basically what we live every single day to for the benefit of our animals.
And it's an interesting paradox that the Manfred scheme came from a livestock, animal welfare livestock group, because when it comes to wild animals, 96% of the Earth's mammalian biomass is made up of humans and their livestock. Only 4% is animals left in the wild. So we've adapted their protocols, their charter for the return of animals to the wild.
They sound, when you explain them that way, they sound remarkably similar in what could be a building block for a Charter of Human Rights, for instance, and the similarities there between human beings and other sentient animals. I mean, the crossovers are just, when you explain them in that way, they seem very obvious to me, and I know that they'll seem very obvious to many other people as well.
Yeah, people
Absolutely.
come here and they say about the kangaroos, they meet the kangaroos and they go, oh, wow, they've all got such different personalities. And it's like, well, don't you think cows have different personalities too? Your dog has dogs have different personalities. Kangaroos, birds, they have personalities. They're persons.
But they do all have one thing in common. They all suffer. They all feel pain. They all feel, distress. They have all emotions that we as people have as well. So, we really do need to respect the fact that they have all of those emotions that we do.
Exactly. And then it's one of the constant frustrations for me that we grant under law the status of personhood to corporations, like major corporations such as mining corporations and banks, so that they can have a legal status under which, if they feel slighted or they're aggrieved in a legal perspective under law, they can sue someone. Yet we don't grant that status of personhood to living sentient beings, which are the non-human animals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, look, like many people around the world, I was blown away with the way that Australians stepped up during the bushfires earlier this year. They donated time, they donated enormous amounts of money and resources to assist those in need. Wildlife rescue and care organisations like yours did an extraordinary job. but the gaps and the issues in our wildlife rescue systems became increasingly and very visibly evident. What are your thoughts as you reflect back on that time, and what do you feel were the greatest challenges that you faced during that time?
Well, there's no doubt that the greatest challenge for me was the awareness of how many animals were left to suffer. We failed so abysmally this year in the fires. I've been involved in fireground rescue for nearly 30 years. I don't know how much time and effort I've spent working with departments and authorities to find the best way forward for wildlife rescuers and volunteers and specialists that can actually get involved and work with our other agencies to rescue wildlife. I mean, they suffer horrendously through fires. They probably suffer as much as anybody and anything can possibly endure. And we were getting places. It was never perfect, but we were really achieving things. Many of us went to great lengths. We spent thousands of dollars to get the accreditations and trainings that were required. Some of the requirements weren't even available in our own state of Victoria, and we had to organise to go interstate to get to meet with the requirements that would allow us to go onto a fireground and participate in a professional and safe manner. And in the last couple of years, it's gone down the drain. We've gone to fire after fire where the same agencies have completely shut us out. We don't even understand why the reactions in these last couple of years have been so bad. I generally refer to our departments as being incompetent, but I'm afraid it's far worse than that. The last couple of years and these last fires in particular have shown that our government departments are actually evil, and we have no idea how many animals have actually been left to suffer and die that we could have saved. And that's the thing. And there's a good example. They say that it was part of the reason for that was that these fires were so big and so dangerous that there was no way that we could be involved in those. But that's a lie, because in other fires, last year we had fires in Victoria and Bunyip State Forest, and they applied the same restrictions on us. So it was a normal fire by any standards, and we were completely excluded from this little fire ground. And the department had their own officers in there to do the rescue, and they guaranteed us that they would go in there and rescue animals and ensure that they were dealt with properly. And we weren't allowed in. And the upshot of it was, by the end of it, not one animal, not one joey was rescued by our government agency. None of them. We worked on the outside of the fire ground, on the properties that bordered the fires where they couldn't keep us out, and we ended up rescuing dozens and dozens of animals, the majority of which were actually rehabilitated and have now been released back to their homes. So we don't understand why the government are being this bad, and we're still asking questions.
Yeah, it was, they made it that they could only have people who'd done their special wildlife training their specialist wildlife training could go. So we both went and did their training, but we didn't get contacted to come out for the fires. Never have been contacted by the department or the government to go and do a fireground rescue, even though we've met their criteria. And when we made contact about going out to do rescues with these bushfires, we just didn't get any answers. They didn't respond.
And we've got a long history of doing this. For many, many years, we have been working with the agencies. We've been working under the incident command structure. We've improved our response and become professional and valuable. And the fire brigades want us there. Many of the other agencies want us there. The one agency that stands in our way are the agencies that are responsible for our wildlife's welfare. It's absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, and what you're telling me is really no different than the stories that I've been told right across the state in various circumstances, and it's developed over a number of years, as you say, suddenly in the last 2 years it does seem to have gone downhill very, very rapidly. That relationship that might have or used to exist between government and the people who are actually doing the work. And one of the other things that kept coming up is that that particularly in the last fires that we've just recently had is that the worry is that there's people out there that are allowed to go on those grounds, government people who are allowed to go out in those fire grounds, seeing injured animals who don't necessarily have the correct training to be able to recognise an animal that's viable, to be able to recognise an animal that can be rescued and have every opportunity to recover and be released. And yet those same people are being able to make arbitrary decisions on whether that animal lives or dies. Now, that to me is an unacceptable circumstance. That must always be done by a professional with the correct training.
Absolutely.
And the other thing about that too, I found frustrating, and I know everybody else did too, was that even while access was being restricted to rescuers, to rescuing professionals, because let's call it that, you're volunteers, but you are, to all intents and purposes, professionals in your given areas of expertise. And different people have expertise with different animals, for instance, and some have great expertise right across the board. But people are being allowed access to their properties to repair fences, to even put foxtel back on, and yet rescuers were being denied access to those very same areas to rescue animals that, had been perhaps survived the fires but were injured, and yet they were out there for weeks and potentially starved to death. It's just a deplorable situation.
Yeah, I think, the culture within the Department for the Environment, which I think is the most Orwellian title ever at this current stage, it's been on a decline. Like 2015, it's since 2000, the number of permits issued to kill native animals has nearly doubled, I should say, under the Andrews government from the Napthine government, which the Hugh Worth described as cruel. So there's been just a decline, and the officers that are supposed to work with us and support us and work with wildlife are the same officers who issue permits to kill animals. There's no animal advocates within the department. And they're also the same officers that were charged with the responsibility of establishing a kangaroo meat industry in Victoria. So there's a massive conflict of interest within the department, and that is a major problem.
It certainly is, and that's a great segue. You make a great point there about that conflict of interest. For me to just to let everybody know, and as you know, that on Wednesday we took some really positive steps forward for wildlife with the government when we debated my bill to create Wildlife Rescue Victoria. It was debated in the House, and finally the government recognised that the system that they currently have in place, that relationship that should exist is broken and irreparably. And that they recognise that fact by creating and announcing a wildlife rescue roundtable with the stakeholders coming in and all getting the opportunity to contribute to the conversation, and that everything is on the table in this roundtable. And that is, for instance, a public inquiry, a full public inquiry, where we'll be able to go out and speak to everybody involved and get their feedback, and to look at creating this new authority. There's support for it, and it's modelled off other emergency services. That there's no need to reinvent the wheel here. The SES and the CFA, since their inceptions, have grown and adapted and learnt and moved forward over the years to the point now where they're these incredibly professional in their operations outfits, but they're largely volunteer-led organisations, and we don't see any reason, and I don't see any reason to break the mould there where wildlife rescue is concerned. We can follow exactly the same pattern, but it must be a new authority. It must be separate from the department so that we can repair that relationship, because it can't go forward in the way that it is now and expect that things are going to change. And if that relationship can be repaired, it's going to go so far to doing the right thing by these animals. And at the end of the day, that's the reason. That's the reason for establishing a new authority. Let's scrap the old model. Let's go forward with something new that everybody can work with and everybody has input into. That, because as I say, at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. We're here to help these animals in these terrible situations, because that's when they need us most, is when they've been injured.
And that's very exciting.
It behoves us to help them in any way we can. Yeah. So,
it is. Sorry.
No, that's okay, mate. That's okay. But I just wanted you to, if you can just give us some thoughts on that new model and how you believe it'll benefit wildlife, and particularly the work that you guys do?
Well, it is exciting, and I mean it's our only hope at this stage because look, I've been involved, like I said, for over 30 years now, and we've been playing with the same model. The model hasn't worked. It's broken. It's failed. So after 30 years of enormous amount of effort, we've actually reached a stage where we've got a worse result now than I can ever recall in history. So we need to do something drastically different, and I think you've come across that solution. And we basically need to wipe the slate clean and start from scratch. And I think you've given us the blank canvas that we need to do this. And with the one thing we've got different than what we had 20, 30 years ago is we've got all of this knowledge. We've got the experience. We've got parts of the solution already had been trialled and worked and had been abandoned. We really just need to pull it all together now. I don't think it's that ridiculously big a task now to fine-tune this and get a system that will work. And will work fantastically. We know we can do it. We know we can save animals. We know we can be effective.
And one of the things, bushfires, one of the biggest traumas for us with these bushfires is that we were blocked from going out and doing anything. We were unable to help. And that causes psychological damage. And I hate to think psychological damage that has been inflicted upon government staff that were sent out to just, shoot anything that looked injured. Those people must be so damaged, and the public the public really, really cares. If there's one thing the Andrews government should listen to is the fact of how much money people donated and how much the incredible effort all the way around the world. We had pouches sent from Germany. We had groups everywhere. German artists raised money for shelters. Wildlife is precious. And needs to be, keeping us sane. We were going crazy, but hearing that you put together this model with a volunteer base, the volunteer base is just wonderful because volunteers care. Volunteers go out and get the expertise. Volunteers are passionate and they put in the hours that government-paid employees aren't going to do. So I have to say, from the point of view of our trauma, we are just so grateful that you have put this together. And, thank God for having an AJP member in Parliament to be able to do that, to raise these issues, because they just get swept under the carpet previously. So congratulations for enacting some radical change that I think is actually really positive change that the public will respond really well to.
And let's not forget that we use the term volunteers and people are a bit fearful of that because sometimes that's taken as being non-professional. Our fire brigade volunteers, the majority of the CFA that go in there and risk their lives and save homes and save families are volunteers. We're just another group of volunteers. I was in the CFA for 15 years and I was a crew leader and a training officer. Many of us have a great overlap, and the reason that I focus now on wildlife is because of what I saw in my time in the CFA and the need that there was a gap there, that we had to improve our efforts on rescuing animals at the same time as going in there and doing the work that the CFA so desperately needs to do.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to point out, as I said before, that, despite the fact that people are volunteers, with the experience that they now have, as you say, difference between now and 30 years ago, for instance, the training that people have undertaken, the professionalism is enormous, despite the fact it's a volunteer base. And I'm reminded of an overseas organisation in human health that you can align that to. You have Médecins Sans Frontières, who are doctors, but they volunteer their time. So they're highly trained, highly qualified people who volunteer their time in a particular situation. And this is no different. And the model that I'm proposing also allows for that. It allows for people with very base level training to up their skills, to train and become accredited, and do more, but it also allows for that support that they currently don't have. As you well know, animals pass away from these injuries far more than they recover. And the emotional toll that takes on people, even in the short term, let alone the long term, can be absolutely damaging. And that's what this model also allows for, the support structure for people to talk to someone, to get help, to help them keep going and do what they do best. Look, we're fast running out of time. I think we've probably all gone over time already, but this is a subject we could talk about for days, really. But there's something I really want to talk about, because it's only one aspect of what you guys do, but it's become in recent times probably the most high profile, and it's drawn attention, if you like, to the work that you do, and that's the mine rescues that you've been undertaking. It's gotten some great exposure, and they're happening in regional Victoria, and a lot of them happen in my region of Western Victoria, because it was one of the biggest gold mining areas, in the world, let alone the state. And so a lot of shafts are now just left abandoned, and they are an incredible hazard to humans, but particularly to wildlife, because a human being can be walking along, see it, and take a visual, go, right, okay, I can move myself out of the way. But macropods, for instance, are bounding along, and 1 minute I can imagine they're just on great shore ground, and the next there's nothing under them. Can you just share with our listeners the issue of those mine shafts and what people can do if they come across one with an animal trapped inside?
Yeah, well, definitely. Well, there's a lot of aspects that need to be addressed, obviously, because we have literally thousands of these dangerous shafts right across Victoria, and especially in the Central Goldfields area. So, I mean, we have been, calling on government to address this issue, and it's something that we do still need to work on, and because basically there's been nothing done. But from the point of view of like a daily situation right now, for anyone that are in those areas and that are walking around and are in our forests and in areas where mine shafts exist, while they need to certainly make sure that they stay safe themselves, because we don't want a human down the bottom of one of these, whatever it takes to see if they can peer down and just check that an animal's not down there, because we are astounded by how often we do end up with wildlife down there. And we're getting called out regularly. I've been doing mine shaft rescues for 20, 30 years. I've done 6 mine shaft rescues this year alone. So we do get a lot of animals there. And one of the things that can be very difficult in these areas is they are in remote locations. They're often miles away from roads and tracks. So if someone does come across an animal, to think about what they can do to make sure we can find this shaft. If they're not able to take us directly there, to mark the shaft, to tie a bright plastic bag onto a tree near that shaft, to mark an access way into their a pin on their phone, using the various technologies. But one of those rescues that I did this year was very frustrating. We'd received a call. We knew there was an animal down a mine shaft. It was almost dark, and we weren't able to contact that member of the public at that time. And so we didn't have accurate directions, and we couldn't get to that shaft. And that animal actually had to stay in there overnight until we could make contact with the caller the following morning. That was very upsetting to know that an animal spent another night there when we could have got it out. So,
and that could have been potentially fatal as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And just the extra fear and stress they've had to have gone through. It could be a life changer. It could be the difference between surviving and not surviving. So call a wildlife emergency number. So any one of the organisations like Wildlife Victoria, ring it through to them immediately, and then take very, very detailed and careful notes on finding the location of that mine and providing that to organisations, so that we can then get that information that we need to, so that we're able to promptly attend and necessary.
Oh, I've got 2 quick questions for you then, and one of it surrounding that then, and when we'll have to wrap up, is so the solution then would, I suppose, be, and please forgive me, I'm trying to jump ahead a little bit there, because I'm just thinking about possible solutions while you're talking about this, would be, I suppose, first of all, to have some sort of an audit so that we can locate them. We could, through whatever government department might be responsible, and so audit them and log them so that those locations are available on a GPS system and a central database, for instance. But then to also fill in those that can be filled in, or fence and cap the others, I guess, would be the thing, yeah?
Yeah, well, in fact, there are groups around that. What they do for fun is they go and explore mine shafts. There are actual organisations around Victoria that's what they do on weekends, and they're really professional about it, and they are actually documenting the mine shafts, and they record information, and they search for artefacts, and they're all about preserving our gold mining history. And so a lot of that information, probably 90% of it, I would think, is already in the hands of these groups that are undertaking these activities. So that side of it, I think we've already got a great head start to. And it also reminds me too that there is a love of our history and an appeal about mine shafts and our engineering and gold mining history. A lot of people come to me and say, why aren't they getting filled in? They should all be bulldozed. We should, put explosives in them. Well, that would certainly fix the problem of animals falling in. I don't want to lose our heritage. I don't want to lose the intrigue. And I love the gold mining past and the engineering that came with it. To me, the simplest solution, and it's got to be effective, is to just simply fence off these shafts. They've got small openings. They wouldn't take much fencing. Compared to the sorts of fencing replacement we've had to do after bushfires, it would be almost insignificant to fence off these mine shafts. It's as simple as that. And we just put in fencing that's tall enough to prevent animals getting through there. And if there's significant shafts and groups that venture into these mines as their recreational interest, if they still want to have access, there's nothing stopping us putting gates and padlocks onto the fences that surround these.
Even just gates.
Yeah, and look, it's just
a gate. Yeah,
no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer.
Yep. Well, look, the only other question I have then, it's just a very, very simple one. I've been asking everybody this. Helen and Manfred, if you could leave our listeners with one thought today, what would it be?
For me, it's that please remember that everything was, when it comes to wildlife, everything was once considered safe and abundant, and they're not. Even, our kangaroo populations, more than half have disappeared since 2016. They're not in plague proportions. And that figure was found from before the bushfires. Australia has the highest rate of mammalian on the planet, and we're second only to Indonesia when it comes to the extinction of flora and fauna. So we as Australians need to step up to the plate and protect our native animals, because our state and federal governments, you excluded and the Greens excluded, but the two major parties, they're not going to do anything for native wildlife. And if we don't step up, we are going to lose them. Everything can be lost. We're witnessing the 6th mass extinction event, and it's accelerating faster than the scientists expected. Yeah. So we're at the tipping point. We're at the edge of the cliff, and it's up to us to not make sure that these guys don't get pushed off the cliff into extinction.
Yeah,
and also just to really think about animals having the feelings and having personalities and a right to all of those freedoms that we discussed earlier. Most people love animals. There's very few that don't have some sort of a pet, whether it's a goldfish, a cat, or a dog. And if something were to happen to their pet, they're so distraught. It's one of the most emotional things that can happen when one of your animals is suffering. These are no different. These are animals the same as everybody's pets. They have the same feelings, the same fears, the same issues. I guess if you're going to think about wildlife, just think about any animal that you care about, and these guys deserve it absolutely every bit as much.
Well, look, thanks for your time today, guys. We've gone well over, but I think we needed to. There were a lot of issues to unpack there, and I know that everyone will watch this right through to the end. And look, I can't thank you enough for the incredible work that you do for wildlife. And look, more strength to your arm. And thanks again.
Well, that's funny because we can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Cheers.
You too.